Hello and welcome to the GoodPractice Podcast, a weekly show about work, performance and learning. I'm Ross Garner, and this week we're asking, how do I develop learning agility, or the need to learn, unlearn and relearn? I'm joined as usual by regular contributor Owen Ferguson. Hello Owen.
Hello Ross.
And from the GoodPractice team down under, we have Giorgio Milgliaccio. Hello Giorgio.
G'day Ross.
And our special guest this week is founder of learntolearnapp.com, Arun Pradhan. Hello Arun.
Hi everybody.
Arun, I wonder if you could get started by highlighting some of the reasons that learning agility is important. Why do we need to keep learning, unlearning and relearning?
Yeah, well, I sort of half-jokingly talk about learning agility is really about surviving the robot apocalypse, but really it's about the fact that in our world today, things are changing so much that we don't quite know what our jobs are going to look like in 5 years, let alone 10 years. These days, the idea that you can actually have a professional degree, for example, which sets you up for a career, they're long gone. These days, it's really about reinvention and constant reinvention. So I often tell people, you're going to have to reinvent your job sooner than you think and more often than you'd like. And that's why you would need learning agility.
What do you find is the reaction to that?
People think, like anything, when you talk about change, it doesn't happen to us. Like death doesn't happen to us. We're all immortal, surely. We're not going to get sick. We're not going to, it doesn't happen to us. It just happens in that outside world. And I think it doesn't help by the fact that we call it the future of work. It's like something yet to come, as opposed to something that we're living in right now. And if you look at any period of, this is a period of accelerated change, but it's not the first or by any means the fastest. There have been other industrial revolutions and so on, but I think during those moments, people don't. It's hard to get perspective when you're in the midst of it. So and it's often hard to think that it's going to apply to you. So I think denial is the overarching theme I see.
I like that you bring up that this is not the first time that this has happened, because I get really wound up, and we've spoken before on this show about the pace of changes constantly increasing. This is the fastest it's ever been changing, and there's been loads of times that the world has changed. A huge one being when women entered the workforce, and the workforce suddenly doubled in size, and that didn't result in less jobs. That resulted in an enormous growth in the number of jobs and growing economies.
Totally. I'm kind of glad there weren't bloggers around when they discovered fire, because it would have been the hype around it would have just been hard to see.
All the rule makers would have been out of work.
But there've been lots of significant periods of accelerated change, and it's usually followed by periods of like almost consolidation and a bit of a slower period. And we're definitely going through a period of that acceleration now. But I wouldn't say it's the first or the last or the fastest, but it is right here now, happening fast though.
I wonder, there's almost two ways, I think, to look at learning agility, and one is, so I think one is positive and one sounds slightly more brutal. And the positive one, I think, is that you as an individual need to be constantly relearning stuff, because you need to prepare for whatever your next job is going to be, or how your job evolves. But the other way to look at it is that organizations can show learning agility by getting rid of the dead weight and bringing in new skills. And so I was wondering, how do you look at that? When you talk about learning agility, are you talking about individuals protecting themselves, which might mean moving somewhere else? Or do you mean learning agility like the organization protecting itself, which can be slightly more cutthroat?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a dark side to this conversation of jobs changing, or depending on your point of view, everyone agrees that jobs are going to a certain extent. It's just the question is how many new jobs are going to replace them. And that context puts a bit of a dark shadow on things, I think. And it's often easier, particularly for organizations at an organizational level, if you don't have a growth mindset, the propensity is to just get rid of staff and to bring in new staff, and to constantly look for that sort of quick solution outside the organization. That is the right thing to do in some situations. But I think organizations who are in that fixed mindset, the leaderships who are in that fixed mindset, will often start there. So I have chosen to focus on an individual level, but pitch it to an organizational level, because I do think it's a win-win. So I think if individuals are able to embrace that growth mindset and to actually know how to actually learn more effectively, more fast, and more smart, then I think it's that win-win for the organization. They don't have to be thrown by the wayside. And obviously it's what organizations need and are looking for today. But yeah, I would be in denial too, to say that it doesn't have that threat or that sort of almost underlying stress level in terms of the conversation.
Yeah, and this pace of change that we talk about, I mean, I think that is, it's different depending on the profession that you're working in. So I think it's impacting on knowledge work in a lot of ways much more quickly than it's happening in some other fields, and those other fields have experienced substantial change previously, as we've already spoken about. Manufacturing and the automation of that has had a significant impact. But I wonder if it's sometimes more you sort of think about it's how quickly are the tools of your trade changing. Because if you, and in particular, if you're working with software, that is changing much more quickly than some other things. So if you think, go back 20 years and the pace of change in terms of even just operating systems or something like, spreadsheets or databases, those would change every few years, whereas new versions of those tools are coming up, every couple of weeks and major releases several times a year. So those tools are changing, and the question is, how quickly are you taking advantage of the new capabilities that are available to you? Because the people who are quickest to take advantage of them and become more effective are the ones that are going to progress more quickly at the very least.
Yeah, I do think it is definitely about the tools, but I think at a certain point that technological landscape can often lead to that disruption, as you know, and to new business models and change ways of doing things. And so I think it's about adoption of new tools, and it's also about the mindset where you're constantly looking for, you're not restricted to the tools. Like I often think back to when they kind of, inverted commas, discovered cameras. And before that, there was almost like the culture of vaudeville shows, like, just plays and shows. And so then they had these cameras, and the cameras became like fixed units, like fixed eyes, like an audience member. Someone actually had to actively invent the concept of a cutaway and a close-up. It wasn't immediate. It's like someone actually had to think, oh, this is actually a camera. We can actually edit and cut and come in close. So I think with each new technology too, it's using it more effectively, but it's also thinking about how this can be a game changer and how we can make it different. And there's a creativity piece in there too, which I think is often lacking.
Can I just add I don't know if being devil's advocate or contrary opinion, but is there a sense that maybe this whole learning agility thing is another, I don't want to use the word fad, but
go there.
But is it just another fad that L&D are hooking into? Because if you look at, and as Aaron, you mentioned before, this isn't the first time that we've gone through change, and organisations have gone through enormous change in the past, whether it's been the Industrial Revolution, the global financial crisis, and they've regenerated and people have adapted to those changes. So is it something that we just need to live through and people will naturally fall by the wayside and others will come in and take their places with different skills or new skills? So is it something that perhaps we just need to let happen, just like a tree goes and things go through cycles? Is that perhaps something, and are we perhaps relying too much on new things like this, learning agility, and when it's just a normal cycle?
Well, I don't think learning agility, it's a fad in the sense that people use the term more and more without meaning associated to it or without substance. And often things are fads, but they usually have, or often they will have substance behind it. And if in this case, I always look at the context. And if you look at the world and the fact that I think most people would agree that it is becoming, because of the nature of technology becoming more connected, disrupting those business models, I think most people would accept that the world today has got that more VUCA element of that volatile, ambiguous, uncertain, complex. I did that in the wrong order. But, because of that, I think there's a premise there that people are going to have to change what they're doing more often. That predictability of your career is not a thing anymore. And we don't know what tools we're going to have to use or what the business model even in a profession, what business model we're going to walk into is going to be. Like I'm working with mining companies and they're saying, well, we know driverless trucks are going to be coming, but we don't know when. And so they're starting to actually put the groundwork for that in. And then I'm working with an accounting company who a similar conversation is like, well, you know, there's already these automation out there, but what does that mean for 5 years' time? So I think the level of change that people are facing now and unpredictability in their role has made learning agility come to the fore still.
I think also on your point, Giorgio, that the stuff that you're talking about, these are massive changes, and they were painful changes. And people did lose their jobs, and with the downturn in manufacturing, towns have been decimated by it. So I think having that in the back of your mind that this is going to happen, then learning agility is more about what you can do to mitigate the risk to yourself on an individual level, and then for the organization, how they can mitigate the risk to them. And looping it right back to Aaron's point about the vaudeville shows, cinema didn't kill off theatre. Theatre is incredibly vibrant, and there's a lot of money. I'm going to New York in a few weeks, and I try to get tickets for Hamilton. And let's just say, I'm not going to Hamilton, but there's huge money to be made in that. So the new tools create different opportunities. It's not necessarily a case of displacement.
What's the difference then between lifelong learning? That's been going around for years now, where we talk about continuing to learn through life. Where's the difference between that and the learning agility?
Yeah, I think, continuous learning, on one level, it's the same thing. It's a different badge. And I have used in my own product, in my own business, learning agility because it has more resonance at the moment. So just from a marketing point of view, I went there. I feel a bit dirty admitting it, but I did it. But on the other hand, one of the challenges I think with continuous learning, with the concept, for a lot of people who are embracing it, they don't see it this way. But when I talk to some organizations who talk about continuous learning, they see it as this slow progression of skills, like it's from almost like novice and you go up to that master through some sort of competency framework kind of model. And then you're kind of updating, but it's this like a linear thing. And for me, learning agility, the term can point to the fact that sometimes it's a total rupture in your direction. You're actually embracing a new fork, if you like, and going somewhere quite different. You might be leveraging what you knew previously, but it's actually quite a different direction.
Lifelong learning, I think, is also a political statement. Owen, you were going to come in earlier.
Yeah, so I wonder. I think we need to strike a bit of a balance. I think sometimes when we talk about the degree of change that is coming, particularly if you go to a conference and someone's doing a keynote, there's almost incumbent upon them to create a burning platform and saying, it's going to be happening tomorrow, or it's happening now, or it's already happened and you're already behind. Whereas the change, if you look,
I've been guilty of that.
Sells tickets.
If you look at the changes that happened in the past, those have come over a period of time. I think there is an opportunity to be considered about this and to build up people's capability to handle it. So we talk about the Industrial Revolution, which happened over decades. Even the introduction of PCs in the workplace, that the impact of that was spread over a long period of time and coming closer to home. If you look at how the smartphones have come into your working life, didn't really come with a bang, but much more subtly than that, and people's habits changed and adapted over time. So I think it's important that people do change is coming, and you do have to skill up to prepare for that. But at the same time, I think repeated doomsaying will get people to be a little bit cynical about how real the change might be.
Well, yeah, you've picked and chosen examples to support your argument, which is fine. I'm now going to pick some other examples, which is the financial crisis, which decimated jobs, or the First World War. I've spoken before about Stefan Zweig's book. I mention Stefan Zweig all the time on this podcast, but he wrote his autobiography, The World of Yesteryear, about living in Austria just before the First World War, and how no one saw it coming. They all thought it was insane, the idea that Europe would go to war with itself. And so these things can come out of nowhere, and they can be shocking.
Yeah, but I think I would just
I'll just pick and choose examples to support my argument.
Of course you will. But I would, and I would agree. Global warfare is something that brings about substantial change in a short period of time. But I would also argue that we are not talking about that as we stand here at the moment.
That's what they thought, though, as well. But let's move on.
Are you predicting a war?
No one can predict it.
No one expected the Spanish Inquisition either.
This podcast is gone slightly off piste, so let's bring it back onto the questions that we thought we would be covering. I think I had 6 questions scripted, so halfway through, let's move on to question 2. What does unlearning look like? What does that mean?
Yeah, so I think for me, if you're talking about unlearning, you're talking about what's actually the way we actually think. So I start from a place of talking about mental models. So in my world, the terminology I use is that we've all got those mental models in our head. We basically have those mental models are a mixture of might be metaphors, frameworks, basically representations of the world and ourselves around us. And that's the basis of our action. That's what allows us to actually take action to understand the world around us. We don't actually see reality for what it is. We actually see a representation of it, and we act accordingly. So unlearning is really the ability to shed those or aspects of those mental models quickly and adopt new mental models in the face of reality, in the face of evidence, which is actually incredibly hard to do because we've all got this sort of, as we get older, as we develop more expertise, we've got this lattice work, and it tends to become more fixed in our brains.
Yeah. I wonder if unlearning, I've thought about this unlearning business. I'm not sure I'm not sure if that's exactly what we're talking about, because you're not forgetting something, you're reframing what you've learned and you are adding to it. And so sometimes you need to drop things that are no longer effective or have been superseded in some way. But you also need to remember that they are no longer effective. It saves you from making the same mistake again. And it's also true in the opposite direction. Just because something wasn't appropriate at a particular time, circumstances change, and it may be useful to try it again. I think sometimes it's about keeping an open but skeptical mind.
Totally.
About new approaches that are out there, and at least being willing to give them a go and drop something that might have been a core part of how you did things in the past.
Well, I think skeptical mind it's definitely part of it. I like to have that beginner's mind, that open mind, but also skepticism is crucial. But to have as much skepticism about your own beliefs as you do about the new ideas, because I think even when you look at your own beliefs and you just like a core belief that you've got about politics or about religion or about whatever it is, if you picture that right now, and it's probably part of your identity, which means it's really hard to shed. But if you think, if I'm wrong about that core belief, what evidence would I see? How would I know that I was wrong? And even if you ask that question, you start to look, as opposed to starting from a place of confirmation bias, which is what you guys were doing earlier, just like quoting the examples that went to your belief. And we all do it, but like how can you actually find that evidence? How can you connect and link up with those people who actually have a counter view to challenge yourself and have that same skepticism internally? I think that's one of the key things about unlearning.
Is it a matter of perspective then? It's in the ability, I guess it's what you're sort of saying, is being able to look at things from a different perspective will change the way you observe something. I mean, looking at a cup from one side is different to another side. So is unlearning really just changing your perspective on things, or is it deeper than that?
I think that's definitely part of it. I think it's really, I think firstly, it's about this concept of mental models. I think is one of the most powerful things I've found in the whole research I've done around learning agility, and to actually really embrace that, the idea that what are the mental models that you're using and bring them to light as much as possible. Then because I studied gamers, I studied key leaders, I studied a range of people, but the person I went back to around this question was actually Charles Munger, who's actually Warren Buffett's right-hand man in Berkshire and one of the richest people in the world. And he talks about developing a lattice work of mental models, and he's very conscious about developing those mental models, almost consciously stealing them from different industries. And I love our industry because we are in the perfect place to do that. We talk to different subject matter experts all the time. So you can basically just find out what's their key mental models that they get that used for their job, and you can just chuck it into your mix and try to like integrate it and shift it and challenge other things in your head. So you basically got this complex toolkit in your brain rather than just the 5 go-to principles. You've got this complex lattice work which you can just bring to bear in a lot of dynamism in different contexts. I think that's what intelligence is, and it's something that you can actually consciously develop. So I think that's the most exciting thing for me, consciously developing and expanding that lattice work.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of work just now on marketing, which is not an area that I know anything about, but particularly automation in marketing. And I can imagine it is terrifying for the people that I'm working with who are in marketing to see almost every aspect of their role can be automated. And then what is left for you? And, we're next, I think, is kind of where that's going, and it's the... I was frantically trying to remember the name of the mental model guy, and so I've just Googled it. Piaget was who I was thinking of. You get new information and you either assimilate it into your mental model or you adapt your mental model to fit your surroundings. So it's not really it's not a new concept.
No, Charles Munger. Even Peter Senge. Yeah, I think a lot of people have been talking about it for some time, and yet it strikes me as something that I'm surprised it's not a bigger conversation in our industry. For me now, one of the conversations I really have is like, what are the key concepts people are doing? What are the key mental models, key belief systems, and trying to out them as much as possible? Because as soon as you shed light on them, there's that self-awareness piece, and you can start consciously substituting, changing things around and challenging. But often it's just that, obviously there's unconscious bias, but even those other more active mental models, that people don't bring awareness to them usually.
So are you able to give an example of that? Because it can be quite an abstract concept, because we're talking about mental models, but have you got an example that could bring that to life?
The classic example that people probably are aware of is the Kodak one, where, the guy that actually came up with digital cameras was actually working for Kodak, and yet Kodak, the leadership who had the mental models around what photography was, what their industry was about, couldn't see the disruption in their midst. At a smaller level, you can see things like a mental model is how we use the computer, the fact that we use a desktop metaphor, which allows us to actually access the computer. And I wonder what the next disruption around that is going to be, which is like a desktop is both liberating because it allows us to use the computer more effectively, but it's also limiting in the sense that there might be a better way, which, like I think of Minority Report or whatever, that's still quite desktop-y, but there's probably a better way, which I'm not aware of yet. But it's just trying to know that I like George Box's quote. He said that, all models are wrong. Some of them are useful. And so it's knowing that the model that you're using is just a means to get you to the next step. And as soon as you find something better, let it go and adopt the new one and keep looking for that better.
I really like the interface in Minority Report, but apparently Tom Cruise had to take a break every 10 minutes because he was so exhausted from waving his arms out.
That's funny.
The windows and a mouse are quite handy, actually.
We'll actually develop stronger arms rather than just strong thumbs.
Yeah, exactly. And why relearning? That was the third part of it.
Yeah. So look, I think
what is it that we've learned before that we need to relearn?
I think it's understanding that we have one of the biases we have is stability bias, the assumption that what's in our memory now is going to stay stable, and it doesn't. And sometimes something that we've thought is no longer valid can actually play a role in another context, in a future context. So there's that conversation. The other interesting conversation from an L&D perspective is, the conversation around spaced recall, which people probably know is one of the most evidence-based approaches to memory. But do
you want to just describe?
Oh, sorry. So, there's spaced repetition, the idea, this is very memory focused, and I should give a disclaimer that I detest the fact that L&D is a lot of focus around knowledge and memory. I think if you do focus on memory and knowledge, it should be about embedding mental models rather than facts and information. But that aside, partly the whole micro-learning buzz and that sort of extravaganza is all about how we can actually use spaced repetition. So learning something in small pieces over time, and particularly through recall. So rather than just having recognizing it and playing to our delusions of competence around it, because we recognize it, we think we know it and understand it. It's more if you actually have to retrieve it, actively retrieve it, that's more effective. But that's actually based on or underlying that, an understanding of that is the Bjorks, the husband and wife team out of California, who do a lot of work around memory. They're great, marvelous researchers, and they came up with a new theory of disuse. And the thing they found was that basically by interrupting the forgetting curve and actually recalling something or relearning in a sense at the point where it's actually starting to forget, that's what's actually moving things from high retrieval into high storage. So basically it's moving it from working memory to long-term memory. So it's interesting that, that role of forgetting and then remembering is actually crucial to embedding in long-term memory, which I think people get spaced recall, but people maybe don't understand that there's that principle behind it, which actually leads to other implications as well in terms of desirable difficulties in learning and challenges in learning.
Sure. So you would learn something and then you forget it over the next few days. But when you're challenged to recall it, that helps embed it in your long-term
Totally.
memory.
I mean, like from a technical point of view, there are all these algorithms out there, but most of it's based on the Leitner method, which was really old school. They were flashcards, right? And this guy just got, depending on which model, like you have 3 boxes of flashcards. You test yourself on the flashcard. If you know it well, you put it in the first box. If you know it kind of, you put it in the middle. If you don't know it at all, you put it in the third box. And the point is, you only test yourself on the first box every month, but you test yourself on the bit you don't know every day and in between. So you're trying to let yourself forget it and interrupt the forgetting curve and to try to relearn it effectively to embed it.
Yeah, I'm often astounded by. I'm going to keep going, Giorgio, and then I'll let you come in. I'm often astounded by how much people in L&D talk about what is the latest thing in learning, without any interest in the old thing that we know works really well and is old-fashioned, but it's kind of the foundation. We've spoken before on this podcast with Miriam Nugent about the importance of having at least some understanding of learning science, and not in the pop sense of the term, but the actual evidence for how people learn when you're doing this job. So I will put a link to that podcast in the show notes. Giorgio, I think you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say, it's because I was reading an article in one of the in-flight magazines a while ago when they were talking about the skills needed for the future of work, as we keep calling it. And they talked about, and if I can dig it out, I'll send you a link for it. But one of the key points he said was about learning how to learn, and I think this is where that relearning comes into. I think we're stuck in the old models, or potentially maybe trying too many new models, I don't know. But they said that what we really need to do is start teaching people how to learn again, because that's what's going to get them through the future. Is that, if they learn how to learn, they'll learn new skills, and I guess that comes back to those mental models that you're talking about, Aaron, about getting rid of those. And I think that's critical. If we don't teach people how to learn again, then I think we can say goodbye to these people. But and I think this is where L&D really needs to come to the fore, is actually using the reach they have in passing on those skills on how to learn. And I don't think we're doing that enough.
No, in fact, I think it's almost criminal, because I think a lot of L&D, and I won't point specific fingers, but like I think, and I've been part of this too, we tend to focus on knowledge transition and knowledge transfer, because that's what we can measure, and that becomes our KPI. So it's particularly in digital learning, it's like just stuffing knowledge in their head. And at this point in time, that's actually criminal, because we're actually trying to free people up to have more of those human skills, those problem-solving skills, and yet we're loading them up cognitively with crap, when they could be in a tool, and we can actually show them the skills about how they can actually think more creatively and have problem-solving processes and develop those mental models. So it is a big change. It's harder to measure, and therefore it seems to be the shift seems to be harder to embrace.
I mean, I think we need to be a little bit careful when we're talking about helping people to learn how to learn, because people are
There's an app for that.
Yeah, indeed. But we are talking
I was biting my tongue. I wanted to say that.
I know you did.
We're talking about learning more effectively or more efficiently. People are learning. They do learn. Otherwise, they would be in stasis all the time. And so it's about, the thing that we're saying is we're not teaching you how to learn. We're helping you to learn more effectively. For particular things. People are very
but
good.
that didn't have there wasn't a snazzy title for me to go with that one.
No.
But you're totally right. It is.
I would challenge that a bit, Owen, because I think that certainly babies and toddlers learn incredibly fast. You learn how to speak amazingly quickly when you're young, and then you go through the education system and you come out and you no longer know how to learn because we don't actually teach how to learn.
No, I think I would disagree with that because
you know less how to learn than you did.
Yeah.
Beforehand.
Well, no, you might be less
qualifying.
You might be less efficient at learning than you were beforehand because a mental model has been created where you think about learning as education as opposed to the reality of it. So you've almost been conditioned to think about it in an inefficient way. And I wonder. Part of me also wonders the extent to which, if you're working in a corporate learning environment, whether you should be bothered at all about whether someone has learned something and just focus much more on performance and almost assume that the learning stuff happens. Is it really up to researchers to figure out the mechanisms that in behind learning? As long as you're finding something that is efficient at improving performance, does that middle bit matter quite so
automating
much?
it?
Yeah, I actually agree with that. It's ironic, but my product is Learn to Learn. But I think it's the second piece of that journey through Learn to Learn. I talk about basically shortcuts and learning smart, and basically don't assume you've got to learn it to get that performance, and just work out, particularly with the tools and with processes and systems and even habits. Frankly, learning is about behavioral change, and behavioral change is bloody hard. We all know it. Who's still eating chocolate when they get stressed or smoking or whatever? It's all of us, right? So why would we start there? Why not start with the environment, start with the system, start with the tools, and then fall back onto behavioral change when there's no other option?
All right, we are out of time. We got halfway through our list of questions. I think we could do another half hour, but let's not. We'll move on to our regular feature, What I Learned This Week, where we each share something we picked up over the past 7 days. Owen, do you want to go first? Sure.
So we have mentioned on this podcast before the productivity gap, and in particular with reference to the UK. And productivity is an economic measure of output per hour, how much income is being generated per working hour for people in the UK. And for quite a period of time, there's been quite a big gap between the UK's productivity and other westernized countries like France, for example. And they've recently done a reanalysis of productivity. And it turns out that the UK's productivity gap with France, for example, is only half as big as we thought previously. And the reason for that is that what happens is the OECD, who's the company that produces these measures, they essentially go out to the other countries and they say, give us your the working hours and GDP figures, and we'll work out your productivity based on that. And different countries send back information based on different measures. So the UK, for example, all the way up until now, have been sending through the working hours that included holidays and sickness time, etc. Whereas other countries adjusted the figures that they sent through to remove absence and holidays, etc. from the numbers. And so it's just a stunning example that this has been on economists' minds for ages. And a lot of the difference has been simply explained by the fact that we were measuring things differently. And it seems like such a simple thing, but what it reminded me of was that, measuring things is difficult, and it's very easy to draw conclusions from faulty data. And so for all the stuff that we're talking about analytics and the importance of data, actually making sure that you're measuring the right things and drawing the right conclusions from it is incredibly hard, even for something as vital as productivity measures.
Cool. How big do you want productivity to be? Pick a number and I'll calculate it. Giorgio, what have you learned this week?
Well, I'm going to bring the level of intelligence right down after that. Thanks, Owen. But ever since the launch of our research, the evolution of 70-20-10 research and Darwin's finches, I've been interested in
those
in
bloody
facts.
finches.
Those finches, yeah.
Sick of hearing about those finches.
Well, let me give you a fact about another bird, and it's about crows and ravens. Now, apparently the tail feathers are actually called pinions, and it's the structure of their tail feathers. And apparently ravens have 17 of them, and crows have 16. And what I love about that fact is it leads itself to the probably one of the most perfect dad jokes I've ever heard, because it turns out that the difference between a raven and a crow is a matter of opinion.
Oh.
But I believe it's also true, but I learned that anyway, and that's as a result of the Darwin's finches that led me down this rabbit hole of interesting facts about birds. So there you go, that's what I've learned this week.
And despite them wanting to unlearn that, they will still remember it.
Well, there you go. I hope so.
I was thinking of going highbrow because I've been reading James Clear, his book Atomic Habits. I'm sort of 3/4 of the way through that, which is fantastic. It brings together Charles Duhigg's work and some of the BJ Fox's work around habit formation. And then I've been thinking, well, professionally in the last 7 days, I've been working with optometrists and accountants, and just the geeking out with them about their worlds has been really eye-opening. But the most interesting thing I've been learning is actually a skill which I've been failing on. It's that my kids have been trying to teach me how to floss, and I must admit, I'm scared that one of them's awake and they'll hear this. I even practice outside of our lessons. They gave me 2 lessons and I've been practicing outside and I still can't nail it.
My wife can do it and I can't. It's a bone of contention.
So that's probably my biggest life lesson so far, and I'm aiming to master it by next week. Just for the kid credibility stakes.
Cool. Well, so mine is proper nonsense, but last night I discovered the most fantastic thing on the internet, which is Google My Business reviews for large supermarket stores. So do you have Tesco in Australia, guys?
No.
Right, so Tesco is probably the most generic supermarket you could go to. There's one on absolutely every corner, but people do leave Google My Business reviews for them, and they're all amazing. So for example, Brian said, "Just basic and it's the nearest shop and that's it. Better with a range of smaller shops as they would be better. The big stores have devastated Inverness, which is so sad. 3 stars. Kind of a political statement for that one. Maria said, "I just wanted to say that over the last few weeks, the Holsey Granary loaf has been so beautifully soft and fresh. If you are baking your loaves in a different way now, keep it up. They're great. 5 stars. Then there's this Trumpian review. This Tesco is way better than the Tesco at the dying Inverness Retail Park. Better selection of hot foods, bakery, deli meats, kitchenware and appliances, clothes and more. 5 stars.
That's brilliant.
So what's worse, the fact that site exists, the fact that those people wrote those reviews, the fact that you read them, or the fact that you're reading them out now? I'm not quite sure.
I have one more. This one's in the style of Ravi Burns. I can't even work it out, really. I came in and went out to shop and find out if Tesco's had what I want, or they could help when in doubt. With a smile and with wit did they guide right to it, the things that I needed and fill my basket. So go for yourselves and buy what you need, for at Tesco's they'll help you find the right foods, and much more if you please. 5 stars.
Oh my God, is that like a haiku or something? I can't see it in front of him. I'm sure there's some poetic edge which we're missing there.
I recommend everyone to have a look at their... what is the most generic shop that you can think of nearby, and go and have a look at why people are reviewing it.
Excellent.
And also, I think the UK's productivity gap extreme.
Can I mention one more, which is for our local McDonald's? And this one was, for anyone who likes McDonald's food, this place is ideal. 4 stars. All right, we'll leave it there. I'd like to thank Arun for taking part today, and everyone at home for listening. If you'd like to get in touch with us about anything we've said, you can tweet me at RossGarnerGP. You can tweet Owen
at Owen Ferguson.
You can tweet Giorgio
at Coach Giorgio.
And you can tweet Arun
at Arun Z Pradhan. That's never going to go down.
I would love to hear the most generic reviews that people can find, so feel free to tweet them at me. You could also tweet at GoodPractice or at GoodPracticeAUS. For more from us, check out goodpractice.com. Aaron, do you want to mention anything? I believe you have an app that helps people learn how to learn.
So I've got an app, with the number 2, learnapp.com, and basically it's out for individuals, but the main thing I'm focusing on now is the enterprise version, which has got a broader campaign around it.
Cool. There will be links in the show notes to all of the above. Next week, Ross D is following up this discussion with a focus on how we can best work with robots. He'll be joined by Owen, Johnny, and special guest Marcia Connor. To make sure you don't miss it, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until then, bye for now.